The Harbor Freight sandblasting cabinet, probably one of the most controversial items Harbor Freight sells. And by controversial, I mean required upgrades. Everybody says you need to do a lot of upgrades to make these up to par for your average sandblasting cabinet. I'm going to actually tell you, I've been using this thing for about a month now. I've actually ran a lot of parts through it. Many of them are just rusted parts off of a tractor that I'm restoring. And I'm going to say, just right out of the box, it seems okay. It's not the greatest, not the worst. It does work. And if you don't want to do a lot of modifications, you can absolutely purchase this cabinet, put it together, use it as directed, and it's going to work okay. But there are 3 major upgrades that have absolutely made this a pleasure to use. So I'm calling these 3 must major upgrades for your Harbor Freight sandblasting cabinet. Now the first major upgrade, and I would actually call this more of a requirement, not an upgrade, maybe an upgrade to your compressor, but you need some form of air dryer. Now, my old compressor here, I home built it, was made with a bunch of stuff, and I was able to retrofit an oil cooler on there with a water collector separator, and it does a fantastic job. Prior to this, once it would start spitting water inside my cabinet, the sand would just clump up, and it did not work worth a darn. So I did just recently upgrade this. I will put a link up there if you're interested in all the parts and pieces I used to upgrade this. It was a relatively inexpensive upgrade, and I think from now on, every air compressor I ever own, I'm going to do this upgrade. It's quite impressive if you need dry air. Now, when I first started using this cabinet, I did not have any type of vacuum cleaner on it whatsoever, and I was just using it as directed out of the manual. It was getting so cloudy inside as I was de-rusting parts that you pretty much just can't see anything, and you were forced to wait a few minutes until all the dust settled, and then you would go again for a few minutes and then wait a few minutes. So there are attachments, and Harbor Freight sells a dust reclaimer kit, and basically this will take all the dust, it puts it inside a filter canister up in the top, and any sand it happens to suck up, it falls in the bottom, and there's a little flapper door here. You can open it up, recollect it, and put it back in the cabinet. Now that being said, the way I have this set up is absolutely not the way Harbor Freight tells you to set it up. It's just kind of something I stumbled onto, and it seems to work really good. A lot of people talk about where to hook the vacuum up on these cabinets, and allegedly this port here is where you're supposed to hook the vacuum port up. And then there is a very large grommet with more of a round plug on the back side that I believe you're just supposed to either pull off and let that be the air intake for the vacuum. I don't really know, but I put my vacuum on the back, and I don't collect hardly any sand up inside this thing. It just seemed to be a really good spot to put it. And then I just left that other port over here wide open, and it works great. Once you turn the vacuum on, it does not dust up at all inside. You can just sandblast all day long, and it's nice and clear. It actually works really well. But that being said, would I buy this again? I don't think so. It's a relatively expensive contraption, and I was expecting to collect a lot of sand down here so I could repurpose it back in the machine. I think a shop vac would work just fine, specifically if you had one of those little bucket shop vacs. Home Depot used to sell a shop vac that would bolt to the top of a 5-gallon bucket, and then you could just tuck it up under here, and you wouldn't have to hang it on your wall like I did. It wouldn't take up a lot of space. Now, I am going to mention one word of caution, or just something to think about, is this comes with a cap, and most people leave the cap on it when they're not hooking their vacuum up, and they use this cabinet, and they complain about all the leaks this cabinet has. And if you think about it, you're pumping air into a completely sealed container. It'd be pretty hard to be leak-proof. You would really have to be very cautious about all the seals, and a lot of people use a caulking gun when they put this together. I did not. In hindsight, I don't think I care, because this cabinet is now under a negative pressure because of the vacuum. And when you turn the vacuum on, the gloves just suck themselves into the cabinet, and pretty much if there was any holes, it's a negative pressure. So no sand ever leaks out of this cabinet now that I have the vacuum on. So the seals that come with it are going to be adequate as long as you hook some type of vacuum cleaner up to it. Now, the third and probably the most important modification you're going to want to do to this cabinet if you use it a lot is going to be the pickup tube. Now, this pickup tube is basically a piece of stainless tube inside another tube. There's an air cavity around it. You shove the bottom of the tube down inside the tank, inside the sand, and there's another rubber hose that goes on top of this, and that is where the machine picks its sand up. It picks it up from the bottom of this tube. But I constantly found myself in situations where I wasn't getting any sand, and I'd have to wiggle the tube around, and I'd pick it up and put it somewhere else in the bottom of the sand, and quite frankly it got annoying, so that had to change. Now, if you do your research online, you're going to find what is called a metering valve, and I'll put a link down below if I can find one, but quite honestly, it's a whole lot cheaper just to make one. Making one just consists of a few parts and pieces, as you can see here. These are just 3/4 inch T's, a couple of them, and then there's a valve, and this valve is kind of important because basically all the sand falls down into this funnel, this funnel here, and it falls down into the bottom of this T, and then you want to blend a little bit of air in with that as it's pumping the sand up. So you can just move this and adjust it just a little bit to add a little more air, and it can kind of increase your volume. Then I left the plug on the bottom, and I put my T sideways like this so I can still get my sand out, and I can change it without having to open the door, but I could still open the door if I wanted to. It's just easier to unscrew this plug and collect it in a bucket. Now, speaking of buckets, I have here a bucket of used sand. Now, I say used sand because most of it is pretty much spent, but basically what I do now that this has this metering valve is I don't use the 40 pounds of sand that the manufacturer tells you to use. I think it tells you to use the full bag of sand. You don't have to do that anymore. You can just put about literally one of these cups. This is a 32-ounce cup, and I don't even fill it all the way, maybe 3/4, and I dump it inside the machine, and since everything funnels down to this central point, you don't need any more than that. And you just keep using that little bit of sand until it's spent and it doesn't work anymore. The sand basically breaks up and gets smaller and smaller. So that's definitely a cost-saving device as well, and it just works so much better. So I consider this a major upgrade. So if you like these types of videos, please give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. Take a look at some of my other projects. You might find something you yourself might want to build.